Okay, we're going to get started. I want to welcome you all here this evening. I'm Carey Weber. I'm the Executive Director of the Fairfield University Art Museum, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here on this very chilly evening. Thank you for coming out in the cold. We are going to warm your hearts and your spirits with this talk and this exhibition of beautiful, beautiful tonalist paintings of Connecticut. Thank you also for everyone who's watching on the live stream. I'm very glad we could bring the people who were downstairs, I think almost everyone, up to join us in the Diffley boardroom. Before I introduce our esteemed guest curator, Mary Ann Hollihan, I have a few quick remarks to make. I want to mention that our other spring exhibition, To See This Place, Awakening to Our Common Home, opens 1 week from tonight, so we hope you'll all come back again for another celebration. That exhibition ties to this one as three contemporary artists, Athena Latoka, Mary Mattingly, and Tyler Ray, also look at landscape. They're looking at our environment and climate change through the lens of their spirituality. It's very different than this exhibition, but also very, very similar. Turning to our Tonalism exhibition downstairs, I would like to first thank Mary Ann Hollihan for her tireless work on this exhibition, for writing the informative catalog essay and label texts, and for the beautiful installation of this large group of stunning paintings in the gallery downstairs. I can't wait for you to see it. We're so pleased to present Dawn and Dusk, Tonalism in Connecticut, to kick off our spring semester, excuse me. Feels like fall, doesn't feel like spring yet. As I mentioned, this finds both our Walsh and Bellarmine galleries focused on landscape, and we're so grateful to the lenders whose generous loans have made this exhibition possible. These include the Florence Griswold Museum, the New York Public Library, the Bridgeport Public Library, Hawthorne Fine Art, LLC, the Cooley Gallery, and several private collectors in Connecticut and New York. The idea for this exhibition was sparked by Bob and Rosellen Schnurr, Fairfield alums and great friends of the museum, and was made possible in thanks to their very generous support. We're also extremely grateful to them for introducing us to the exhibition curator, Mary Ann Hollihan, without whom there would be no exhibition. We'd also like to thank our other generous supporters, especially M&T Bank, Wilmington Trust. We have several representatives here tonight, as well as the Traditional Fine Arts Organization and John and Barbara Hazeltine. Thanks, as always, go to the exceptional museum team for their hard work in bringing this exhibition and its associated programs to life. Michelle DiMarzo, Curator of Education and Academic Engagement. Megan Pacwa, Museum Registrar. Heather Coleman, Museum Assistant. And Elizabeth Viano, Museum Educator. Please do check our website, Eventbrite site, or the exhibition catalog. We have some wonderful programs that are associated with this exhibition, and I want you to find all the information about it, so I'm not going to go into detail about those. Okay, on to our main event. Tonight's speaker is the curator of Dawn and Dusk, Tonalism in Connecticut, Mary Ann Hollihan. Mary Ann is a unique combination of scholar and collector. She graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, summa cum laude, and earned her JD at the University of Virginia. After being outside counsel at the New York State Council on the Arts, Mary Ann returned to art history and completed her graduate training at NYU's Institute of Fine Arts in Renaissance and American art. Then, after a long stint working with the American Decorative Arts Department at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Mary Ann researched and published a seminal work on American federal furniture entitled Scottish Cabinet Makers in Federal, New York. She's now in the process of completing a book on the progressive tonalist artist Frederick William Cost. Mary Ann began collecting old master prints as a teenager, and together with her husband Jack has amassed collections of New York federal furniture, Hudson River School paintings, and tonalist paintings. Mary Ann is going to introduce you all to the tonalist movement and to this beautiful exhibition of paintings. Then I'm going to join her back up here for a conversation about the exhibition and her passion for collecting, which will be followed by Q&A. Please join me in welcoming Mary Ann Hollihan.
Well, good evening, and welcome to What is Tonalism and Why Have I Never Heard of This Before? It refers to a type of painting produced between 1880 and 1920 by a group of painters often referred to as the, quote, New Men. This is John Francis Murphy, his Misty Tree line of 1901. Tonalist paintings are mostly landscapes. They're mostly New England landscapes. They are intimate views, which you might call enclosed landscapes, not vistas. They are not narrative, they are not anecdotal, and they are mostly depopulated. They are synthetic, they are not particularly representative of a specific view, and they are often painted from memory. Tonalism is technically complex. Tonalist artists employed a limited palette of complementary colors, a harmonious color scheme, the use of glazes to suggest atmosphere, the patterning of forms, ambiguous space, the use of the lost edge or soft edge technique, that is the blurring of outline, contrapositional brushwork, brush strokes go in opposite angles, and an obvious texture to the surface of the canvas intended to reflect the scintillating light of nature and the energy of nature. In all, it is a more expressive and suggestive way of painting the reality of the impermanence and the metamorphosis of nature. Tonalist art has a transportive purpose. It is silent, ambiguous, poetic, symbolic, moody, and evocative. The themes of impermanence, remembrance, solitude, timelessness, and abandonment are prominent. The artist's manner of seeing and telling what he sees becomes important. A painting is between a thought and a thing. It is intended to draw you in, to make you think and feel. You are intended actually to feel even more than you see. Quote, one of the great difficulties of the technical part of art is that its business is not to reproduce with literal fidelity the forms and colors of visible nature, but to convey to the beholder the artistic or poetical impression produced by these on the artist painter. This is from an article in the Atlantic Monthly from 1877. In execution and intent, tonalism was progressive and radical. It is a truly indigenous, homegrown, organic art movement, and it was recognized as such. The intent of tonalist artists to convey a poetical impression was best served by the colors of and the associations with dawn and dusk, autumn and winter. Now, the very first thing, and the most important thing to understand, is that tonalism is driven by transcendentalism. Ralph Waldo Emerson's 1836 essay, Nature, held that one encountered divinity in nature, the contemplation of which led to accessing the divinity in oneself. In religious terms, it brought one closer to God. Quote, in the woods we return to reason and faith. And in his 1844 essay on beauty, quote, but beauty in nature is not ultimate. It is the herald of inward and eternal beauty. As one art historian observed, aesthetic sophistication was regarded as a mark of spiritual refinement. Emerson's essays and Henry David Thoreau's Walden of 1854 were widely read right through the 19th century. Walden went through 154 editions by 1900. J. Francis Murphy had a copy of Walden, attended Emerson's funeral in 1882. He also visited the site of Thoreau's Walden, dug up a sapling, and brought it back to his home in the Catskills. Dwight Tryon and Frank Currier were also devotees, and many other artists, collectors, and people were well-versed in the notions of transcendentalism. This quest for engendering what we might call interiority is the essence, the Americanness of American tonalist paintings. Now, a further bit of context. Okay, this is Homer Dodge Martin's Lake George from about the 1860s, the middle of the 1860s. Now, many of us are familiar with the Hudson River School painters, at least I hope we are. This was the first real art movement in the United States. The paintings are depictive. They're often of a specific place, like George. They are often grandiose. They are detailed. In short, they are finished pictures in a classical tradition. The National Academy of Design was founded in 1826 and by mid-century, the painters were the landscapes, were selling quite well. But by mid-century, some of the artists of the Hudson River generation were developing away from that mode. This is George Inness's view of Durham, Connecticut in 1879. George Inness, Homer Dodge Martin, and Alexander Wyant, we'll be seeing some of their work, were the three outliers. Inness's Durham, Connecticut is a composition that is simple, it's horizontal, there are few elements. It is what we can call an enclosed landscape. That is, the elimination of a far horizon. This is Homer Dodge Martin again, 20 years after Lake George. This is his Normandy Shore of 1884. The emphasis, as you see, is on a rock-strewn foreground, keeping one's attention right to the surface of the picture. This is ambiguous space. We visually wander across it, and we mentally wander across it. What are we doing here? Homer Dodge Martin, by the way, spent his honeymoon in Salisbury and painted the Twin Lakes area. This is Alexander Wyant, his Gray Hills of 1879. This is a radical painting. There is not a rock or a blade of grass or a bush or anything that you can make out in this painting. This is all paint. There is no definable detail, as I just said. It is truly a picture between a thought and a thing. I'm also going to show you, just for fun, Alexander Wyant's Housatonic Valley of 1885. This is in the Smithsonian. Alexander Wyant also painted in Connecticut. There are a number of views of the Housatonic. Now, Inness, Martin, and Wyant, with their simplified compositions, their harmony in tone, and their looseness in execution, were changing the direction of art. They came to be known as the masters or the triumvirate. So, why did they change their style? Well, artists do that, but prominently is the Civil War, and it is hard to overstate the wrenching impact of this conflagration. The psychological and emotive states related to this upheaval were deep, raw, and public. The late 19th century turned to various manifestations of spiritualism, meditations, and workings of the mind. Inness was a devotee of Swedenborgianism. There is more in your catalog about this. I'm not going to really go into it. But people were very much aware of how they were experiencing the world, both scientifically and with reference to art. And they turned to imagery that offered solace, remembrance, or a spiritual or mystical experience. Secondly, European travel had a great deal to do with changes in American art. This is Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot. Now, Americans traveled to study what the Europeans were doing. We did not have a lot of art schools in the United States until really the very late 19th century. And the art of the late 19th century was often characterized as Barbizon, after the village on the edge of the forest of Fontainebleau outside of Paris, home to a group of French painters who rebelled against the formalized, idealized classical paintings preferred in the Paris Salon. Landscape, per se, was not a valid subject. So they left, and they settled in and around Barbizon. Their paintings are characterized by lack of detail, loose brushwork, intimate, quotidian, simple, quiet, dreamy views bathed in the atmosphere. They were also anecdotal. There were lots of peasants, nymphs, and animals in Barbizon paintings. The French liked narrative. George Inness visited the Barbizon in the 1850s, meeting with Theodore Rousseau, and this sparked a reappraisal of his style. By 1878, he had loosened his style and formulated his theory that the purpose of art was to generate an emotion, any single emotion, the true beauty of the work residing in the sentiment it expressed. So artists coming into their own about 1880, the new men, steeped in notions of a purposeful art, went to Paris, Munich, and the various art colonies in Northern Europe. By this time, the Barbizon painters were historical. Typical of what they produced is this. Charles Harold Davis, Haystacks. He painted this in France. And I think you can see, when you see it downstairs certainly, there is an energy in this picture and these almost mystical haystacks kind of parading across the field, all within this golden orange tonal envelope. They also went to Munich. This is Frank Currier's Two Trees of 1880. Frank Currier and John Henry Twachtman studied there, and the Royal Academy in Munich stressed expressive composition, bravura brushwork, and the dramatic use of color, light, and shade. Currier's work was considered highly radical in its day, and I think it's pretty radical now, but there's these swirling, activated, abstracted forms and colors, the colors sort of blending and bumping into one another. Currier's watercolors generated a storm of controversy when they were shown at the American Watercolor Society back in New York. So into this mix of influences comes the flamboyant expatriate James Abbott McNeill Whistler. This is his Santa Maria della Salute in Venice, and it is an etching that he did for the Fine Arts Society. Whistler developed a highly reductive, dematerialized image and called his works harmonies, symphonies, arrangements, and nocturnes. He worked with shades of the same color, further harmonized by the tonal veil. His was a highly reductive, elegant aestheticism, employing ephemeral forms and ambiguous, dreamlike compositions. His work engendered a flood of paintings of dusk, evening, and night. Practically every American artist exhibiting at the National Academy of Design in the late 80s and early 90s produced at least one picture of dawn, evening, dusk, twilight, whatever. I'm going to run through a bunch of them really quickly and you can see them all downstairs. This is Leonard Ochtman's White Pines at Dusk, 1886. Charles Warren Eaton, Winter Solitude, 1887. Bruce Crane, Sunset, 1890. Homer Dodge Martin, Silence of the Brooks, 1895. Charles Harold Davis, Sunset over Mystic, 1900. Now, the imagery and technique of Whistler's art was instructive and revelatory, but not his art for art's sake philosophy. Foreign techniques and ideas were certainly seminal, but American critics were clamoring for artists to create a national art, something uniquely American. And through their focus on creating emotionally impactful pictures of landscapes with animated surfaces and abstracted natural forms, they did. American progressiveness was recognized internationally. At the 1900 Paris Exposition, quote, "In landscape art, we are in the front rank. Here is perhaps the unique contribution to the exposition. American artists at home win triumphs in this field." This quote is also in the catalog. This critic is referring to all of the artists you're going to see downstairs, the tonalists. By 1909, the formal exploration of color theory called tonalism had been codified by the artist and instructor Burge Harrison in his book Landscape Painting. There's more on this in your catalog. My point being only that half of the illustrations in this book were the artists we show here: Ranger, Tryon, Ochtman, Crane, Foster, Weir, Carlson, and Inness. Connecticut was a hotbed of tonalism. Okay, so we divided the show by location just to give some order to it. This does not imply stylistic congruity or chronology. You will see that even though all of these artists knew each other through exhibitions at the National Academy of Design, the Society of American Artists, the Society of American Landscape Painters, through the clubs, the Lotus Club, the Century Association, the Salmagundi, And, exhibitions all over the place. They all knew each other's work. And you will see that they all have a different manifestation of their tonalist style, their way of reaching into the interior of you. Okay, so this is Ben Foster. Foster lived in Cornwall, and this is his Housatonic Twilight of 1910. His work appears conventional, but when you actually look at it, there is this very unsettling sense of disequilibrium, basically arising from the point of view from which he is painting these views. This is Charles Warren Eaton, Connecticut Pines, 1903. This is a painting about loss. Again, I refer you to your catalog. In the middle of the state, the Hartford area, and to the southwest, the Greenwich area, J. Alden Weir was in Branchville. Twachtman was on Round Hill Road in Greenwich. Leonard and Minna Ochtman were also in Coscob. Mary Loring Warner lived in Middletown. Amelia Watson was from East Windsor. And Robertson Mygat lived in Ridgefield. J. Alden Weir's Connecticut Hilltops of 1900 shows you his most tonal moment. He was extremely friendly with John Henry Twachtman. This is Twachtman's Icebound of 1889 at the Art Institute in Chicago. We have an early Twachtman when he was working with Currier in Munich. We do not have a late one, but I wanted you to see how his palette lightens and how the patterning of this picture, again, pulls you right to the front of the picture plane and shows you the inherent abstraction in nature. Again, one's eye wanders over this. You're going back and forth. You're not sure where you're supposed to look. The only other thing I wanted to point out is that, of course, as you can probably guess, Alden and Weir were very much into Japanese prints. Weir had a huge collection of them. This is Leonard Ochtman, Winter in Connecticut, 1915. This is what it looked like at my house this morning. Okay? Ochtman was a master of extremely delicate tones, and he was noted for this, and collectors just loved it. Ochtman manages to capture the most subtle lavender shades of these Connecticut winters like no other artist can manage. This is Mary Loring Warner, her Landscape with Barn at Sunset of 1887. This is a perfect example of the iconography of abandonment. So popular during the after Civil War period when people were fleeing New England farms and going west. This is Robertson Mygat, Edge of Pond, 1910. This is synthetic, patterned, austere, with a palpable atmosphere, the tonal veil. This is what the artist feels as he is looking across the pond. Now, this is Henry Ward Ranger. Now we are in Old Lyme. Henry Ward Ranger credited himself with inventing the word tonalist. He didn't. What he did do was establish the colony at Florence Griswold's boarding house in 1900 in Old Lyme. Ranger and Davis lived in Mystic. Robert Miner lived in Waterford. Alan Talcott lived in Old Lyme. Chauncey Ryder was born in Danbury, and he too was part of this Griswold group. This is called the Forest Road of 1911. Now, unused or rutted roads were sort of standard iconography in tonalist paintings, but this painting, the texture, when you see it downstairs, the texture of this painting carries your eye right across it, and it vibrates, it pulsates with the energy of nature. It is a very effective picture. This is Robert Miner near New London. Again, we see these swirling forms that are really just blotches. It is an enclosed landscape, and it keeps you right there and very aware of the surface changes, the atmospheric changes in this picture. This is Charles Harold Davis off Noank, 1895. All I'm going to say about this is color field. If you don't know what color field is, Google it. Was color field really rooted in European modernism? No. This is Bruce Crane, his Frosted Fields of 1925. Again, the imagery of abandonment and the very controlled and spare use of color. Chauncey Ryder, Sunlight in the Valley, 1915. Rhythmic, patterned, surreal. The artist is conveying what he feels, quote, "I paint by feeling." Now, there were many more tonalists working in Connecticut. We have quite a group of them, but there were a lot of them, okay? This is Walter Clark, his Autumn Landscape. I'm glad they have, we have words on these. In any event, this is Walter Clark, Autumn Landscape. He had a studio right next to Inness in the Holbein building, which was the studio building where many of the artists worked in New York. This is also Franklin DeHaven, his Stormy Road of 1901. Again, there's that abandoned road. And there are those swirling forms of movement in nature. Okay, so Franklin DeHaven was a very prolific painter, and he taught Mary Loring Warner. His home was in Tolland, Connecticut. Now, was tonalism progressive? Without tonalism, would there have been American modernism? This is Franklin DeHaven again, his orange trees. And again, you can see that sort of wonderful surface patterning, lending movement to these canvases. This is Emil Carlson's Golden Tree of 1904. This is Charles Birchfield, The Big Tree, 1927. This is Alan Talcott, Cedars by the Meadow, 1900. John Marin, West Point, Maine, 1914. Now, by 1900, of course, another new generation of new men came forward and represented by these two, by Birchfield and Marin. Did they actually see Carlson's work and Talcott's work? Maybe, maybe not, probably not. But they tapped into the idea of conveying the energy in nature and its emotional impact. This was their rendering of the same idea. Papers here. The reductive tendency, the emotional purpose of the tonalists that led to their abstraction of form, filtered through the modernists and into the 20th century. The aim of much modern and contemporary art is precisely what tonalists came to achieve, creating a state of interiority to make one think and feel, to draw you into the picture. This is Whistler and Rothko. I'm not going to say anything about it, just look. This is Ranger and Helen Frankenthaler. Okay, all right, so why have I never heard about tonalism? Well, it's largely due to what historians thought was important when art history emerged from the morass of the Great Depression and World War II. The Museum of Modern Art under Alfred Barr focused on European modernists. Why? Because at this time, art historical scholarship was dominated by European emigres. After World War II, a lot of professors from Europe came in, specifically from Germany, as you can imagine, and they entered the halls of Princeton, Harvard, the Institute of Fine Arts, and many other institutions. They promulgated what they knew, yet, and they promulgated modernist art, European modernist art, much of which was shown at the Armory Show of 1913 that showcased this modernist movement in Europe. Yet, virtually nothing at the Armory Show was sold. Matisse's Blue Nude was burnt in effigy when the show traveled to Chicago by the art students. 2 years after the show, one of the organizers recalled, quote, "The international exhibition of 1913 surprised New York, disgusted Chicago, and horrified Boston." Were Gilded Age Americans naive dolts? No. They were simply on another trajectory. Okay? Tonalism was widely collected by thoughtful and progressive collectors, and it was expensive. They understood the relation between art and spirituality. For some, like Andrew Lang Freer, who, of course, gave us the Freer Gallery down at the Smithsonian, the contemplation of art was a truly mystical, transportive experience, an out-of-body experience. Nevertheless, Whistler's radical paintings were ignored. The transcendentalist spiritual aims of tonalism were forgotten. The paintings were pulled out of museums, put in an attic, or sold to someone. American landscape in general was considered retardataire, imitative, and just not as good as European art. We sunk into self-deprecation. The person who really put tonalism back on the map through his 40-year study of these painters is David Cleveland, who unfortunately can't be with us tonight, but I know he's watching us, aren't you, David? His 2010 tome book, Do Your Exercises Before You Try to Lift This Thing, A History of American Tonalism, 1880 to 1920, Crucible of American Modernism, proves that the tonalist movement was the leading art form of the late 19th and early 20th century in America. Unquestionably, we would not be here but for David's research. So I will leave you with this. If you want to know more about tonalism, that is the place to go. And I will leave you with Emily Dickinson. Quote, "The soul should always stand ajar to welcome the ecstatic experience." Thank you.
Mary Ann and I are going to have a brief conversation because I have questions for her, and then I'm going to let you guys ask her questions. But I get first crack because I've been getting to enjoy these paintings for quite a while, and I haven't had Mary Ann to myself to ask all these questions. When did you first become aware of tonalism? I mean, I know you've read David's book. I know you know David, but like,
When? Okay.
when
Well-
did this all hit you, and how did this start?
Well, you know, Jack and I collect Hudson River School
Do you want
paintings.
to just pull that a little? Yeah, there you go.
There. Okay.
Perfect.
Jack and I, my husband Jack and I, collect Hudson River School paintings, so we are, you know, pretty well versed in what's going on in the 19th century in paintings. And in the early 90s, we moved to London. So friends of ours said, well, you know, there's this other couple in London that also likes American paintings. You should know them. So in any event, they set it up. We were invited to David and Patsy's house. We walk in the door, and there is a very long hallway that is filled with Whistler engravings. I'm speechless. Okay, so then we walk into the living room, and triple hung and double hung, and there are wires and picture lights all over the place with all of these paintings. I mean, it was mind-boggling. And so, but the clincher came when Patsy opened the closet door to hang up our coats, and there were 3 paintings hanging on the inside of the closet door. And it was like, okay, you guys are really into this, and we're really into this. We got to know each other. And so it was sort of a wonderful, experience over really the last, long has it been, 35 years that we've had looking for and looking at these toneless pictures. So we were very receptive because, of course, we knew about, painting in the 19th century, and it was like, oh, yeah, well, we understand this.
But you really hadn't, you'd known Hudson River School, but you really hadn't known what came next.
Because the Hudson River School painters, I mean, the best things were done during the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah.
And, when you got to, I mean, they were still painting in the 80s. And they were also, by the way, Hudson River School painters were also collected during the time that the tonalists were painting.
Because they kept going.
They kept going,
Yeah.
yes. I think Bierstadt died in, 1892?
Right.
So, anyway.
So let's stay with the concept of collecting tonalist paintings, and let's just say that one of these fine people in this audience loved everything they saw on the screen. How could you not? And they are thinking maybe they want to go looking for a tonalist painting. Are there still
Yes.
tonalist paintings out there? Is it a market that is worth continuing to explore?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because, first of all, there are a lot of pictures. A lot of these painters were very prolific. There are lots of tonalists out there whom you know, and lots of tonalists who are yet to be discovered. I don't know, a few years ago, I just saw a painting at an auction. I said, gosh, this is good. Who is this guy? And, the painting was very inexpensive. And, oh, by the way, the tonalist painters are nowhere near the prices of the Hudson River School painters. And that is changing. So the first thing to do is really to go to, I would say, if you're really interested, look through David's book. There are other sources, but they're not great. There was a catalog from Spannerman in 2005. I would say look through the book, see who you like, go to Google, see where these pictures are coming up. And the things I would concentrate on, the areas of tonalism that have not been explored, are watercolors. They had the most, watercolors were very important in the late 19th century. And the tonalists produced the most exquisite watercolors. Currier, particularly, if you like that kind of wonderful abstraction. There's another watercolor downstairs by Arthur Hober. Mina Ochtman, Leonard Ochtman's wife, did a lot of watercolors. A lot of women artists did watercolors. I would also look for women artists because there is Mary Loring Warner and a few, but trust me, there are a lot of them out there to be discovered.
Fantastic. You mentioned briefly, I can't remember which artist it was, the winter scene, that's what your home looked like this morning.
Oh, Ochtman.
Ochtman, yes.
Leonard
That's
Ochtman.
such, I mean, when we get depressed, you guys need to just come back. You haven't seen the exhibit yet. You're about to see it. When you get depressed, you're going to want to come back again and again. This exhibition is just, it's the perfect exhibition for winter. Even the winter scenes are comforting, and they make Connecticut look so good.
Well, but Thoreau,
They really do.
but Thoreau said that winter purifies nature. So, there is a very deep connection there. And, winter is a very contemplative time. So I think, you get quite a lot of I don't know, solace, just joy looking at these things.
Yeah. Are there any elements of the painted landscapes down there, specific things that you see in your daily life, in your landscape, that things that you know?
Oh, God, yes. Okay, so, oh, God, yes. So, a few years ago, we bought a picture, and we hung it, and I looked at it and said, these trees, they have this kind of greenish gray stuff on their bark. It's a winter scene, obviously, it's a winter scene. And didn't think anything of it. I had studied, I looked at the picture, studied the picture. And so a few weeks later, I was driving to Litchfield on one of the back roads up there, and it was February, and the snow had melted. And sure enough, I see this green stuff on the trees. And I would not have noticed that had I not seen that picture. Art makes you see. Another time, we had some friends coming over. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 4:30 in the afternoon, late autumn. when the sun comes just slanting its rays across the hills and the fields, and everything turned gold. And I said, the tonal veil. They learned to paint this. So yes,
Okay,
they inform your life.
Yeah. I'm one more question, then I'm gonna give you all a turn. Is there one thing that you really want people to think about and take with them as they go downstairs and look at this exhibition?
Yes, yes. We made really good art. It was really good, really progressive, really thoughtful, and transportive.
It
Okay.
is, it is. All right. I'm going to, do we have Michelle's got the microphone in the back of the room. We're recording this, so I'm sorry, we're going to make you talk into the microphone. But I'm sure you have questions for Mary Ann. So raise your hand and Michelle will bring you the microphone.
Well, I was curious, because you mentioned that a number of these painters would also work in the studio, but when you talked about that green on the trees, that was so specific. I started wondering how many of the paintings we're seeing were painted on site, and how many were painted in the studio, and what kind of, I mean, I'm sure it was different for each artist, but have you learned about that?
Yeah, a little bit. Many of these, it was a thing to be able to paint from memory. So, I mean, lots of artists painted outdoors. Lots of artists went outdoors and they sketched and they brought back their sketches. Okay, so let's talk about Leonard Twachtman again. He's a great example. He went out, he made sketches, went back to his studio in New York, put the sketches upside down and painted. Okay? The idea was to paint from memory because, of course, you had internalized what you saw in nature, and you were trying to paint that feeling. Okay? A lot of them did that. Ben Foster, a lot of them did that.
Anyone else?
Is the Courier the same Courier as Courier now is?
No. Frank Courier was born in Cincinnati, and he was German and of German descent, and he went off to Munich to the Royal Academy to study. He was associated also with Chase and Twachtman and Whistler, and and I wanted to mention too, a lot of these artists did not encounter Whistler in the United States. There really wasn't an exhibition of Whistler's work in the United States until 1889, when a number of his things were shown at the Wunderlich Gallery. Most of the artists encountered him in Europe, in Venice, in Paris, in London. Homer Dodge Martin, by the way, and Whistler were very good friends. Jimmy Whistler and Homer Dodge Martin spent pretty much the year of 1876 together.
And Mary Ann has written beautiful biographies of many of the artists in the exhibition catalog, so make sure to grab a copy. Question here.
Did artists like Andrew Wyeth were influenced by this type of art, tonalism?
Andrew Wyeth, actually, he was painting in our area too, up in Stockbridge. He's later, and he is really, I wouldn't call him a tonalist at all. I mean, he was really an illustrator. He was much more depictive. I mean, I think Wyeth had his own thing. His art is really not about trying to create, like a spiritual message in people. This art really was. It's a totally different animal.
Mary Ann, congratulations on very important and pioneering work you've done. You've dedicated so much of your life to this. You did not give us a sense of what was going on. When you said Paris, you talked about the Barbizon, but in the 1880s, the Impressionists were lighting up the world with gaiety and the joie de vivre of Paris, whatever. You spoke about transcendentalism, but how much was this a kind of just indigenous Yankee sobriety?
Well, yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head. A lot of it was. I didn't talk about Impressionism because I didn't have time to talk about Impressionism. But you know, the tonalists did not think much of the Impressionists. They thought they had no technique. They thought that this whole idea of scattering paint across the canvas in blobs and then letting your eye sort of put it all together was like really not natural. It was not scientific. It was not natural. Their feeling, when I talk about the tonal glaze and their color sense, what they were really doing, and if you read Burge Harrison's book, his 1909 book, or even the description I have in the catalog, he describes in very detailed terms how to get these kinds of color changes, this idea of reverberation in nature, and through a series of oil glazes. He talks about refraction, vibration, and how to attain these. So it's really very technical stuff. And as to, you know, the Impressionists lighting things up, well, yes, they were, but so were the tonalists. The tonalists were the major part of the major collectors in the major collections in the late 19th century. I had some notes on who these people were, but okay, just put my glasses back on. Okay, William T. Evans, who was a major collector, had over 800 paintings. Many of them, the large part of them, were tonalists. Okay, Samuel T. Shaw, 200 paintings. The main number of them also tonalists. George Hearn, 500 paintings. Hearn was one of the founders of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He gave quite a lot of this to the Met. And there are like a list of other people who were essentially collecting the tonalist painters. So again, I think that all the hoopla about the Impressionists is really a sort of an art historical construct, and because they could be tied to the French Impressionists, therefore they must be better. Okay, so that's what I'm going to say.
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
Is the tonalist movement really unique here to New England, or do we see snippets of this style?
You see it elsewhere. It's elsewhere, yeah.
Do they call it
It's-
tonalism? If it appears?
Yeah. Oh, and yes, and one thing, since David's book came out, there's something called the American Tonalist Society. They have a website. Look at it, because that's a very easy way of seeing a lot of pictures of a lot of paintings that, you know, you can say, oh, well, you know, I like this one and I don't like that one. There are artists who are online, and they are saying, well, I am a tonalist artist, and this is what I'm doing today. And, you know, there's really been a blossoming of this, and I think it's because we have never, as human beings, lost a quest for spirituality. Okay, so this has really sort of hit the art world in a big way.
I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much.